Welcome to another episode of Capacity Building Stories, where members of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building Network share examples of their capacity building efforts with us. My name is Susan, and I support the coordination of the PCCB network here in UN Climate Change Capacity Building team. Today, we are honored and pleased to be joined by Nick Pyatt, the lead trainer and coach in Climate Sense and the director of Trioss. Thank you so much for being here, Nick, and welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting us for this great opportunity. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. To give our viewers a little bit of background, I would like to mention that the work of Nick and his colleagues in Trioss is focused on supporting organizations to understand and develop their climate capacities to adapt to their climate change risks and challenges. Nick, we are really excited about the opportunity to learn more about capacity diagnosis and development tool. And to kick off the discussions, it would be great to have a bit of background of how this tool came about and what was the thinking behind it.
So the underlying question that led us to even start thinking about adaptive capacity was a slightly different one. It was, why is it in our experience that really important information doesn't necessarily make people more aware? And that if they are more aware, that doesn't necessarily lead to meaningful action. And so we started off holding the question, what are the barriers and what are the things that can remove those barriers? And from that, we've been able to, we've came across indicator behaviors from which we've been able to develop this set of metrics. And one axis of the matrix is looks at what we call response levels. If you're an MBA student, you might call it a maturity index. But it's basically the logic with which people respond to their climate change challenge. And we have 6 levels. And sentences which would maybe sum up the essence of each response level is response level 1 would be, don't bother me with this nonsense, I have got a proper job to be getting on with. Unless maybe we are in the development context, where maybe we have a very remote farming family who, whether or not they wanted to adapt, they have no capability to do so. Response level 2 would be, well, I'll do what others require us to do, but no more and no less. Response level 3 is a key response level because this is the point at which an organization starts to take ownership of its adaptation journey. And for some organizations, that's enough. For many organizations, it isn't enough though. And so there comes a point at which you've done everything you can with business as usual efficiencies and you realize it isn't enough. Now, at that point, you don't necessarily know what it is you need to be doing differently. So you need to move into a period of innovation. Some things which will work, some of which don't work. That's what innovation is about and learning is about, to work out what you need to be doing differently. Once we've gone through that process and worked out what we need to do differently, then you can then mainstream those new practices. And then there's a 6th level, and we very rarely see it. And it's sort of the Mahatma Gandhi or the Nelson Mandela or those sort of mold breaking behaviors. So we look out for that, we notice it when we see it. Now, one of the things in this process is to understand that you need all levels of adaptive capacity. You need a functioning organization. You always need compliance. You need efficiencies within your business as usual process. You need the capacity to innovate. Then thinks, how do we move between those levels? And so we've broken down adaptive capacity into what we have as 9 pathways. One is awareness. One is agency, the extent to which we can spot an issue and know what to do about it. There is leadership. There are the agents of change within an organization, either formal or informal, those people who really want to see change happen. Working together, collaboration, learning, managing operations, scope and coherence, and the use of expertise and evidence. And we break down the elements of capacity into those 9 pathways. And what we then do is allow to measure each of those pathways against the response level at which they're performing. And what we find is, for many organizations, the different pathways are functioning at different levels. And that's the basis of working out where you are, where you need to be, and how to move between the two.
Thank you so much, Nick, for this fantastic overview. One interesting aspect that come to mind when listening to you is how versatile this framework is, and how with necessary adjustment this could be used as a fit-for-purpose tool given each organization's conditions, circumstances, and needs. Which bring me to our next questions. Could you give us some examples of how CAD in different contexts and supply chains and institutions help various organizations to build their climate capacities and their adaptive capacity?
Sure. We worked with water companies in Kyrgyzstan, 15 water companies in Kyrgyzstan. And we went through a process of benchmarking their adaptive capacity before the initiative started, measuring it after they had done physical risk assessments and action planning, and then after leadership coaching to support the implementation of those plans. Once we had been through a risk analysis and physical risk management planning exercise, and even an exercise to look at the adaptive capacity changes that needed to be made, we could see changes in big changes in awareness, in agency, in knowing what to do, the collaboration between the organizations, between the evidence and the expertise that they were bringing to this. The one thing that didn't change, hardly changed as a result of all of the planning, was their managing of operations. They knew what to do, but they weren't actually changing what they were doing. Now, this speaks to a key issue to me in adaptive capacity development. In the way our brains work, the acquisition and ordering of new information is a completely different process to the process for changing behavior. And a lot of capacity development focuses on information and awareness raising, which is important, foundation, but it isn't enough to deliver the change behavior. So we raise the understanding of what to do, but actually the organization, some of those companies were quite reluctant to turn that into practice. By the provision of leadership coaching to allow people to reflect as they took those plans forward.
Thank you so much, Nick. The examples you provided help put this conceptual framework or this visual matrix that we see really in context of real life examples. And another issue is how to ensure once these capacities are built and strengthened, they will be retained and sustainable over time.
How you retain capacity, to some extent, depends on the response level that you're able to get to. If you remember, it takes until that third level of adaptive capacity response level for an organization or a family or whoever to take ownership. So the level to which you're able to take ownership is a point at which capacity can be retained. It's a fluid, it's a complex, dynamic situation, and we always need to be working at it. Even sometimes we need to keep working to stand still.
For Trioss, as a private entity that is a member of the PCCB network and other networks under the UNFCCC process, how do you see the role of private sector in this bigger picture, and how do you think the contribution of private sector to this collective goal could be further enhanced and utilized?
Wow, great question. So I think there's a couple of things that spring to mind. The private sector in the development arena, particularly, is tends to be used to scale up the implementation of practices that have been decided elsewhere. The exposure that those companies have through that experience and the lessons that they learned creates a great potential for innovation. It's not a thing that you can switch on and off, because businesses who have been asked to be compliant are set up to be compliant. So there needs to be a managed transition. Those people commissioning the innovation need to understand how to do that effectively, and they need to work with the private sector to build those capabilities and expectations. I think another thing is that as governments and other organizations take ownership of their own adaptation journey, then the private sector is a great place to go. It's a marketplace. We're in the marketplace. It's a great place to go to say, okay, well, I want to go beyond what the donor community or others are offering me. I want to take more control in that. And okay, here's someone offering a service. Here's someone offering another service. Those look useful. I can piece those things together. I can build around me the service provision that allows us to work in the right way. And so I think the private sector can be particularly well placed to serve that strengthening ownership as governments and others raise their adaptive capacity and take ownership of their own journey.
Thank you so much, Nick. It was an absolute pleasure to have you today with us. I learned a lot, and I am sure many of our viewers would agree with me. We wish you lots of success, and I am sure we'll stay in touch and we'll hear more and more fantastic news about the work of you and your team in Trioss. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and thank you to PCCB for the opportunity. And we also wish you well for your fantastic initiative. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And a big thank you to our viewers for following the capacity building stories. If you find this conversation informative, make sure to share it with other capacity building enthusiasts, experts, and learners in your network. Thank you.